Sup bros, I'm Terry Bull, and this is part 2 of my analysis of the conversations we can't have. If you haven't seen the first part, I would suggest you watch that first. I will put a link in the description, and I will try and get a button here so you can click that to go watch it first, because that contains, like I said, the first part of the article. This is a analysis of a radical feminist and anarcho-communist article on intersectionality versus social capital and trying to add social capital as another intersection within the intersectionality paradigm. And now I'll pick up where we left off. Social capital and radical communities. Social capital is a term originally from, I'm going to butcher these names, Bourdieu, Lowry, Coleman, and Ports, and then later utilized in economics, despite the fact that the value of social networks has been studied by social philosophers for much longer. I'm here referring to social capital as the sort of cool points that make certain people untouchable, unquestionable, and invulnerable to critique. Of course, this can be just your social safety net, queer kinship, or chosen fam, but for this essay we're focusing on the accumulation of social capital as it creates informal hierarchies in radical communities. It doesn't just create informal hierarchies in radical communities, bro. It creates informal hierarchies everywhere. But remember, she's an anarcho-communist, so any sort of hierarchy is, in her view, is bad. Social capital is really just the relationships and trust we have, but it is also a type of currency that we can give and gain according to certain rules that we've largely intuited or aggressively been forced to learn. What she's basically saying with aggressively forced to learn is cultural norms and, oh, what's the other term? Social constructs like gender and sexuality and sex. Basically anything that unconscious bias would be another example of this. Or internalized misogyny, internalized homophobia, internalized racism. Any of the internalized things are things what you would have been aggressively been forced to learn. But because, yeah, you didn't choose to learn any of those things. You just did because they were forced on you. This social capital as currency can then aggregate around cults of personality, creating the recipe for dominance and coercion. This is a common critique of anarcho-communist ideals. It's actually a critique of anarchist ideals in general, bro, not just anarcho-communist, because the argument is that some sort of hierarchy will eventually fill the anarchist vacuum. So it's not just anarcho-communism, bro. Don't try and make this all about you, bro. But she's basically talking about celebrity. You know, people like Meryl Streep and Emma Watson, they've gained so much social capital from the other things they've done that they can use that to speak on large platforms. But I'm sure though she would probably think those were good examples of the use of social capital. I'm not sure. She's not here to speak, so I honestly should not make those assumptions. So I will refrain from continuing to make some assumptions like that. Furthermore, social capital itself can be used to create and gather more social capital. In this way, there's a high risk for runaway wealth accumulation, where you can buy more social standing in relations with your existing social standing in relations. I'll go back with Emma Watson. She gained a lot of social capital from being in the Harry Potter movies. She was a good actress. She was able to play the role of a very well-liked and popular character, and now she's using that as a platform to quote-unquote speak on behalf of women worldwide. And she's used that to speak at the UN and at all over the world at various different conferences and stuff like that, which gains her even more social capital to be able to do that even more. It's kind of like a stock market, really. You use your existing currency to make more currency through buying and selling another form of currency. Social capital is when a well-known organizer commits violence against someone in the community, often a cis man to cis woman, but queers, trans folks, gay men, dykes, and straight cis women, I'm looking at y'all too. And then the victim story is minimized because the organizer, without anyone saying the words, is determined to be more important or at least harder to challenge. Well, I'm glad you're suddenly... I have to comment on this. She keeps defining social capital in different frames. In the first few frames, she is acknowledging that these are different ways of looking at social capital. But in this one, social capital is this. It's not just a perspective. Now she is talking about social capital. This is social capital. Right here. This is social capital right here, bros. This is it. This is the true form of social capital. All the other things is just masks of it. It can be chosen fan, but no, this is real social capital right here. At least that is what the languaging implies to me. And I do have to point out that she does acknowledge that the various different quote-unquote oppressed groups can be guilty of this thing too. And us in the anti-sjw and skeptic crowd have seen this for a long time. And I do have to point out that it's very good that she's acknowledging that this is a problem and that it can happen. I don't think it is her going as far to say that these people can be cisphobic and racist against white people, but I think it is a consideration in the right direction. This is a simple narrative, especially when it's from a straight white man to a straight white woman, that radical communities have begun to build some ability to confront, although it's still horrifically common. She's basically saying this is in line with what we have as an anti-sjw see a lot. When a straight white male hits a straight white woman, he's automatically demonized, and she is immediately saintly because women can do no wrong, and because they are in the progressive stack, so to speak, of oppressed people groups. However, when the woman assaults the man, there are multiple overlapping layers of oppression, privilege, and social standing. The issues can get so complicated that we tear each other apart just trying to parse through them. You know, like those clearly discernible power flows that you mentioned earlier. I'm not going to let that go. I'm seriously not going to let that go. But continuing my thought earlier, this is the case too, because she's framing it within radical communities, but in the public at large, you see this too, when usually when a straight man hits a straight white man hits a straight white woman, I really hate that I have to put the talk in this frame because I really hate this frame, but we're going to use her language and her words, so okay. Society will automatically assume the guilt is on the male end of the spectrum, and she is purely the victim. That is what she means when she's talking about the straightforward, simple narrative. But when it's the other way around, there is a split. There will be some people who side with the woman because women can do no wrong, and then there will be people siding with the men. And then that polarization between the two different sides causes nuance to be thrown out the window despite all the middle crowd in between. That actually looks at what happened in the actual facts of the incident. So I do have to say that this is a good thing that she's brought up here. This is a very good point. Communities become polemic and internal rifts are created that are often never overcome. Accountability becomes impossible as people compete to be the victim. Narratives are often created and accepted even when the involved parties actually do want a more nuanced process. Like I was saying, social capital often interacts with complicated power dynamics to paralyze our ability to have the conversations we need most when we need them the most. So once again, the power flows in clearly discernible paths, except when it doesn't. But honestly, her point is valid that we can get too caught up in who we like more than the other. And actually, okay, in the paradigm that she's talking about, she's talking in intersectional terms about weighing the various different oppression points, which is just another form of social capital, but she's still putting them in these terms for some reason. But yeah, in these radical communities, the oppression points are an effective form of social capital which people can use to gain power over another and say, no, I get to talk here, etc. And she's illustrating the exact problem with intersectionality and adding social capital as merely another intersection in it, because it just makes things even more convoluted than just intersectionality. It's like, oh, what the fuck, that comic? Homestuck. I briefly read it before I got totally confused off it, bros, but I do remember early in the comic, they talked when they were, oh fuck, what was there was this little sprite like thing and they had to add things to it. And then they showed that the more they added to it, this little chess game that was evenly matched at first just got even more and more and more convoluted. And that there it's like, yeah, it's just like it's just like taking a line and then you add one intersection and now you have a grid. You have the X and Y axis. And now you've added social capital, which makes it a 3D cube. And now you have an extra infinity of possibilities. So it just makes it, first you had the spectrum. And then you had a scatter plot. And now you have, which had infinite possibilities on two different spectrums. And now you have an extra third infinity of possibilities on a vertical spectrum as well as two horizontal spectrums. Now let's just add a fourth axis to it and cross even more dimensions and forms of infinity. No, admittedly, we should not try and oversimplify issues, but we should try and, it's my opinion that while we shouldn't try and oversimplify issues because there does have to be more nuance than necessarily a spectrum or yes or no or a binary, but we should try and avoid overcomplicating them more than they already are. That's what I'm trying to get. Social capital can be gained in many ways, and sometimes these ways overlap. For example, one can often be entitled with social capital as the direct result of structural privilege and the conditioning that it bestows. Structural privilege and conditioning. We'll get to more of this later, but no, this doesn't come necessarily with structural privilege because in SJW communities, you get this privilege. The more oppressed you are, the more privilege you have in the dialogue. So that is actually that actually you have constructed an quote unquote anti-structure with anti-social capital. Oh, you probably don't want me to call it anti-social capital because no, it can't be used in instances of social structural privilege because you believe that that is bad and the social capital gained from oppression is actually somehow better or good because you can use that in SJW communities. So yeah, it is, fuck it, I'm just going to go with it and call it anti-social capital. I'm just going to do it. It just makes it so much easier. This is that white passing monarchist or Brocialist. Brocialism. That sounds like a political and economic philosophy I could get behind. That's 1/16th native with blue eyes and identifies as genderqueer, but is cis male passing and feels entitled to all the POC and queer spaces despite being pretty generally terrible, especially to dark-skinned queer femmes that he wants to fuck. Most of these examples come directly from that. Just kind of soured the entire let's get along together narrative that you've been weaving this entire time. Where exactly is the nuance in that description? She just kind of quickly threw that let's get to know each other and look at nuance thing out the window right there. Seriously, what exactly you can say that this comes from real stories, and I have no doubt that there are people like that out there because there are douchebags in every community. But watch. No, I'm gonna continue this thought after the next few sentences because she continues with this demonization of the male side of radical communities. But this terrible person, pejorative much, is liked a lot by the other shitty and macho POC queer dudes or popular native fetishizing whites. So he's actually seemingly quite popular to the extent that it becomes dangerous to critique or question him. So you have to be careful about any sort of male activist in your group because he might be this terrible person, especially if he's well liked by the other radical men in your group. But seriously, yeah, there are people who abuse their privilege and their power in any group. This isn't just strictly to radical communities, and trust me, this is not specific to men. There are plenty of women out there who abuse their social capital and privilege also, and are genuinely terrible people. So why are you making this specific thing a gendered issue, Emmy Bro? If you ever see this video, I genuinely want an answer to that. Why are you making this a gendered issue here when you're all about nuance and breaking the narrative in every other instance in this article? Seriously, Emmy Bro, let me know. I genuinely want to know. Because this section here is probably the most hypocritical section out of the entire article, and that's saying something. Alternatively, social capital can also be awarded because someone is intersectionally oppressed. This is that antisocial capital that I was talking to you about not too long ago. For example, there may be a trans woman or black femme who can get away with acting abusively because they have too much oppressed social capital to get called out by anyone other than someone with the same rough oppression tally, with whom they've built a personal solidarity, or someone else that is exceptionally trusted, brave, and otherwise delicate. This is what we in the anti-sjw and skeptic communities see all the time. And she brought this up earlier in the section that I covered in my last video. And it's a genuine problem. I mean, we see people getting away with, say, false rape accusations. There was one recently of a broette who had sex with 2 football players and then accused them of rape. And this is what she admitted, bros. She accused both of these bros of rape. So the person she wanted to actually have a relationship with wouldn't look down on her for her decision to have sex with 2 other guys. Her case was examined, and she was found out to have been lied because other people saw her directly asking them for sex and wanting it, and then she admitted it herself. And this kind of ruined those bros' lives. Rather, it could have, but I've heard conflicting statements about whether or not that college actually did cut their scholarships and stuff, or if they were in fact reinstated onto the football team after everything was cleared up. But regardless of if that is or is not the case, there are still people who are going to side with that girl and say and maintain that they raped her, regardless of what the actual truth of the matter is. Obviously, these 2 forms of social capital, privileged and oppressed social capital and anti-social capital, are very different in that the privileged social capital is structurally backed, and anti-social capital, oppressed social capital is only backed, if anywhere, in radical communities. Okay, so she actually brings this point up later with specific instances, so I'm going to wait until she does to go on my little rants about that, because it is not just backed in purely in radical communities, bros. As mentioned by William Gillis, or whatever, I don't know, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name, in Personal Dialogue, social capital is not a universally fungible currency. Social capital in one group may be negative social capital in another. Social and antisocial capital. Sorry, I guess I am a little bit too proud of myself for coining that term. Give me a little break. There are competing currencies of social capital that may not be accepted as payment everywhere. This would be like trying to use an Israeli shekel to pay for hummus in Lebanon. You might get the secret police called on you, or at least some spit in your food. The symbols or rules one internalizes in the in-group may in fact work against you in the out-group. It's as if that these clearly discernible flows of power are not exactly that clearly discernible because it is totally context-based. Structurally backed social capital, as presented by those with privilege as it's generally used, is also backed by the state, which means it's backed by the police, who will assist women when they accuse someone of assault. Government, which is currently funding the Day Without a Woman that is going on right now as I record this, as many different public school systems have declared it a paid holiday for teachers so that they can go and protest and not work, while still getting paid with taxpayer money. I repeat, there are female teachers who are taking the day off, and schools have shut down and declared it a paid holiday so they can go protest while still getting paid with taxpayer fucking money, bros. And cultural norms. Cultural norms that say that women can get any job they want should they choose. Cultural norms that celebrate female sexuality and say that women should be able to express themselves sexually however they want without any sort of social ridicule. Except for, when men want to express themselves sexually in a non-homosexual way, and that's always being a sexual aggressor somehow. But also, as far as police, it is not like that the police are not totally demonized by supporters of Black Lives Matter, which, oh wait, that gets supported by the media, which is an institution, a very powerful institution that it's not the government, but it's a very powerful institution. And let's see what other institutions. Oh yeah, colleges have the right to suspend due process when men are accused of rape. They have their own little disciplinary panels that they go to, which supersede court trials, which is actually what is required in a criminal case such as rape. But, structural privilege and cultural norms and all that. As radicals, we know this and see it play out so often that in an attempt to counteract this coercive dynamic, we try and build up people made marginalized by society, especially if they are charismatic, funny, and attractive. This process is not inherently bad. To the contrary, it's a form of love and commitment to equity, but when applied uncritically in all situations, it runs into clear limits, especially where the justifications of violence is concerned. Basically, it's okay to prop up an oppressed person because they are oppressed and funny and are generally liked by the community, but you still have to be critical in who you prop up because they might not be of totally wholesome character. And honestly, that is a good scruple to have, bros. You don't want someone who is well liked, but is going to end up being a total douchebag in public and making everyone else in your group look bad. It's the case in any sort of community. It literally just takes one tiny misstep of a figurehead to make an entire community look bad. It's true. But yeah, this is basically affirmative action right here. It's good to prop up someone who is oppressed, etc., to speak on behalf, because that makes up for their oppression. That they deserve that because of their oppression points. Is basically kind of what is going on here. Social capital, like any other currency, can also be lost, often at another person's gain. For example, a person who has social capital but makes a mistake that renders them vulnerable, others can build on their own social capital, by publicly attacking this person, especially if the core person attacking them also has social capital. The social capital stock market and all that. You use your own social capital to invest in more social capital by taking away this other person's social capital. This is especially possible when the person who is being accused, whether rightly or wrongly, occupies a less marginalized identity than the original accuser. This phenomenon happens because a person can gain cool social points by siding with the oppressed person and attacking the less marginalized person as a form of virtue signaling. Fuck, bros, they found us out. Abort, 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 abort. Disperse, 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 disperse. But in all seriously, bros, yeah. They've discovered our term and are using it now. Now it's not our term. Anyone can use it. But yeah, it's true. You will see that. You see that a lot with the social justice warriors and SJWs. They will usually side with the person who they feel is less oppressed than the other. Like in early things, the white cis male and white cis woman example. Signaling and team sports. There are some essential ideas here that show some rules about how social capital is bought and sold. Signaling is a tool of social capital accumulation that is basically about sending a code to a particular group that suggests we are of the same group. This is like going to a Bernie Sanders rally and saying, Bernie Sanders is the only hope for our nation's children. At a Bernie rally, this is a great way to make friends, build trust, and signal for applause. However, this is not a good way to make friends at a GOP convention, unless the other Bernie people are watching it live on TV. There are countless ways we can act on this, and subtle dynamics that I don't have the space to address here, because they're compoundedly infinite, But it is important to understand that this can affect how power shifts socially and make it not clearly discernible. Virtue signaling is a related phenomenon that has to do with signaling that one is virtuous as defined by the in-group, as a means of building social capital. This is the white person who describes at length how bad racism is because they think it will give them credibility and earn them trusts. And in many communities, it will. This can also be the activist who doesn't do the grunt work of organizing but gets all the interviews and photo ops at the action, and as a result is known as a key organizer. This is also the person who donates money to a charity solely for the publicity it gives them. This is pretty much what most of us in the anti-sjw and skeptic community point out when we're talking about virtue signaling. They don't necessarily, they make a big show of being in solidarity, but they may not actually be totally genuine with it. For example, that Audi ad at the Super Bowl with the father wondering how he's going to explain the cruelties of the world to his daughter, because it points out the myth of the gender pay gap, and then when challenged on it, they're like, "Oh, no, we've been in compliance and paying men and women equally this entire time." Honestly, in this point, she is doing a little bit of mind reading, because unless you ask the person their intent, you don't know. The alt-right and many anarcho-capitalists and libertarians have weaponized this tendency of the left in order to demean any explicit sentiments of social concern or empathy as merely virtue signaling, deserving of sociopathic ridicule at the level of mean popular kids in high school. Seriously, bro? You're gonna bring up the high school metaphor when you're talking about intersectionality? But no, bro, this is not just an alt-right and anarcho-capitalist and libertarian thing. There are plenty of liberals who are using this too. I know quite a few of them. I watch their videos. So I don't see why you're trying to pin it on this. But no, you don't get to call this the mean popular kids at high school social dichotomy thing when you're talking about intersectionality, because bro, the intersectionality paradigm totally brings up the entire high school caste system with the geeks and the band kids and the jocks and the cheerleaders and the popular kids and the outcasts. In the stereotypical high school setting, there can be no mixing of those groups because that's taboo. The geeks can't be friends with the jocks, and the jocks have to go with the cheerleaders, and the band and choir kids cannot get together at all. No. That would be bad, because rivalries and, for lack of a better word, ethnocentric groups. Yeah, no. You can't have a smart jock or anything. That all jocks are stupid and everything. And you can't have any cultural mixing because, oh my gosh, that would cause pandemonium in the streets to have a smart kid that goes out for football, or a cheerleader who is actually caring about more than just her appearance. Oh no, that would go against the total social order. But no. It's not like we have black communities that are trying to keep from intermingling with white communities because cultural appropriation and institutional racism or anything. It is not like those intentionally segregating themselves using institutions isn't just institutionalizing racism even more, are they? No. Okay, I'm getting off topic, but no. You don't get to play the moral high school metaphor at this case, bro, because intersectionality just reinforces that entire social structure on a macro scale, bro. While they're manipulating the concept with weaponized army to support their own fascist violence, the critique of the left's performance of good intentions in a popularity contest is a valid one. At least she's acknowledging that questioning someone's intent is a valid argument. I will give her that. It's useful to consider even if it came from the outgroup such as the broader right or even left market anarchists and post-left people. So she's acknowledging that it's not just the alt-right and libertarians that make this argument, bros. She knows fully well, and yet she started off this argument by demonizing the alt-right and the far-right and the libertarians and anarcho-capitalists because this isn't about nuance. Seriously, if this were about nuance, she would have included these groups up there with those groups. And this really makes me mad because later she talks about dismantling the in-group, out-group, and far and near-group fallacies. She has this pattern of making a statement and then backpedaling to, oh, no, no, not quite. And then making another absolute statement, but no, 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 it's more nuanced than that. And really gets on my nerves. This phenomena places positions of informal power as being more important than the actual impacts we need desperately to build. Basically, it puts more focus on the individuals rather than the group effort. Which honestly, there can be areas where drama kings and queens can disrupt the, productivity of a group. It's true. Further, these acts of inauthenticity can also obscure attitudes such as anti-blackness under the window dressing of liberal anti-racism. This is the whole Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, because it has to be Black Lives Matter because they're the oppressed group. It can't be treating the problem holistically, bros. You have to treat the symptom of the problem of people treating badly because it happens to one group more than another, instead of just telling people in general to not treat other people badly, which would end treating people badly for everyone once it catches on. But no, that's window dressing. For example, a white ally might play the role of a good white ally to a T, but yet remain completely unwilling to invest in the difficult work of actually engaging with their own racism in a soul-searching and consensual trust-building dialogue with actual folks of color, by deferring constantly to something. So basically, they have to do more than just talk the talk. They have to walk the walk in... I really don't know. Because the concept of unconscious bias and internalized racism and stuff like that assumes that that aspect is innate in that person. It's like the concept of original sin in Catholicism and Christianity. You can't really get rid of it. You can just constantly self-flagellate and say, all I've ever seen in this dialogue of privilege is you just have to acknowledge that you have privilege and defer to people who don't have privilege, thus giving them privilege. You're basically donating your privilege to someone else the entire time, I guess? If anyone can give me a definitive answer about what a white person is supposed to do to absolve themselves of their white guilt they've accrued just by being white and having a de facto racist bias no matter what they do, let me know. I want to know. By deferring constantly to something that a person of color has said, many white people have been known to absolve themselves of guilt and avoid critical inquiry. So basically just doing what a person of color says makes them feel like they've done enough, but they haven't really. But of course, the level of conversation we need to have is dangerous. This would make sense for that everyone involved would be hesitant. We have seen it all go to shit or get hijacked in bizarre ways with massive fallout. This just means we need to do it better, not that we can afford to avoid it altogether. Our paradigm that we look at things is not wrong, we're just doing it wrong, is what she's saying. Intersectionality and deferring to people who are more oppressed based off of this anti-social capital is not wrong. It's not just another form of social capital that only works in our group, that doesn't integrate with the other groups. No, it doesn't separate us from the deeper conversations we actually have to have and maybe just unify social capital as the only system we look at things at. No, we have to keep this intersectionality paradigm and add social capital to it. We took in the spectrum and added a y-axis to it, so now it's a scatter plot, which gives us infinite possibilities of intersections and interworkings of society. And now we're going to add the z-axis to it, which adds a third infinity of things that we can do to look at things. Seriously, bros, that's what they're doing. It doesn't work this way, so they're making it more complex rather than trying to simplify it down to a manageable system. And now I understand there is a point where you can oversimplify things, but when you're trying to solve a problem, I think the best issue is not expand the complications that you can do, adding a third and fourth and fifth axis to the interdimensional chart of intersections that can possibly be. But that's what's going on here. It's not acknowledging that frame of reference is wrong. It's saying it's right. We just need to add this extra coat of paint to it. When we fall into games like this, we are essentially playing team sports and constantly signaling to prove that we are either team blue, which is better than the evil team green, or vice versa. This prevents us from deeply engaging with ideas or efficacy in favor of groupthink with all its accompanying failures and nuance. While I do see that is great that she's acknowledging the concept of groupthink and how that eliminates nuance, she's also engaging in the groupthink in her demonization of the masculine element of radical groups and the implicit demonization of the cis-white category of the radical groups. She's still holding on to that narrative while saying that we should critique narratives without actually critiquing her own narrative. And that's the really frustrating part of this article, bros. Further, this team sports creates not only in-group and out-group dynamics, but also near and far-group fallacies, such as the radical fixation with prioritizing liberals as enemies more so than a group like ISIS. This can also be seen when someone is more quick to empathize with Putin than that of a local liberal, despite the fact that one is almost certainly a significantly larger threat with a value system that is much farther away ideologically from ours. What she's basically talking about is the imagined distance between different ideologies. For example, a fascist is on the opposite far end of the spectrum to a communist. On the political spectrum, they are on opposite ends, therefore they are, quote, far away from each other. It's a really complex line of thinking that also is like, if someone identifies as liberal, you'll support them even if their individual ideology doesn't necessarily match up with yours. But because they're liberal, you'll follow them because they're not conservative. And therefore, you'll agree with them in a de facto manner, regardless of maybe the conservative's ideology is closer to yours where it matters. Once we've mastered the near-far fallacy, we can virtue signal with it to our in-crowd to get points. Like a white person saying, I hate white people. This has not only to do with geographical distance, but also a scope and sensitivity to treat as a result of perceived ideological proximity, like I already described. If one's a liberal, they're automatically on your side. If they're conservative, they're automatically on the other side. It's through these types of processes that people can end up deeply advocating for things they internally don't even believe or agree with, just because they value what it means to seem to believe a thing. This is referred to by Daniel Dennett as belief in a belief. So someone may say so-and-so is the worst racist in the world and a rapist even though they know that this is not true, or at least that it's exaggerated. Could this be a concession to the entire Trump grab him by the pussy video? Probably not, but it definitely could be construed as such. I'd be interested to find out what she was referring to, because that's a very oddly specific reference she has there. But believe that it will advance them in some other way, or they believe that they should believe it even if they don't. Now this involves a lot of mind reading too, bros. You might see the person advocating for A, B, C, and not know that they also advocate X, Y, Z, which is against their political principles. Now, I think she might be construing them defending themselves even after they found out, as saying, oh yeah, I agree with that too, but I don't know. I can't really speculate too much on that, because unless someone tells you specifically they meant something, you can't honestly say that they did. These types of fallacies, and there are of course countless others, and social power dynamics come into play especially during a crisis situation in radical communities. As communities become polarized and fall into encampment, a dehumanization of the other team begins and fractures radical communities into splinters. You see this in the greater international community and social community as well, bros. And you're seeing this right now with the far left and far right, and people saying the far right are evil and the far left are evil, and that Trump supporters are the worst people in the world and Hillary supporters are the worst people in the world, and on both sides you see it. This is not a call for watered-down consensus-style liberal unity. Divides are a healthy aspect of dissent, and individual thought coupled with the natural emergence in affinity. And I agree. A totally homogenized society is not going to be a healthy one, really, in my opinion. We can work to eliminate oppression, but we may never eliminate conflict, short of the Rapture of the Nerds Singularity upload. I'm guessing that's a movie reference, bros? I don't know. However, the situation often becomes so toxic that people who should reasonably be allies are torn apart in the search for social standing, cool ally points, and self-righteous certainty in lieu of nuanced appreciation for multiple intersecting layers of power and violence often at play in any given radical flashpoint of conflict. Yeah, I can get behind what she's saying here. I mean, I don't agree with her forcing this to be an intersectionality issue, but yeah, there are people who will shove other people under the bus to look good, and only for that. Some people are douchebags. And that's all there is to it. Love and intimacy. In my experience, the confluence of all these issues is usually surrounding a really toxic relationship between two or more often marginalized and popular radicals or organizers. I don't see how someone can be marginalized and popular, but this is anti-social capital we're talking about, and it doesn't follow the normal rules of structurally backed social capital. When they are both well-known cool activists, the fallout from the relationship can lead to a bitter breakdown of communities, leading to vicious infighting and even physical violence. At a certain point, we don't even know what to believe as the exaggerations blur with the actual facts of the violences that have occurred. It becomes a competition to control the collective narrative rather than a process of legitimate inquiry and accountability. You know, like what's happening with the mainstream media right now. And honestly, a lot of the alternative media. Like, what's happening with the media right now? I'm just going to simplify it to that because, honestly, we seek to fit things into neat boxes wherein whoever has the least social capital will almost always be framed as the aggressor, whether they are or aren't. Now, is this anti-social capital or social capital? Are you talking about least amount of social capital within your group or least amount of social capital in the out group? Because those are literally the opposite things. I guess the least liked person will be held as the aggressor, is what she's saying. We also often return to our oppression tally and seek to vilify whoever is the least structurally oppressed in response to a historical radical tendency to minimize the violence experienced by marginalized people. So if there's a woman and a man involved, we have a knee-jerk belief that the man is wrong and the woman is right because that is most often how the pattern works. If there's a white person and a POC partner, we assume that most likely the white partner was acting on some internal racism because that is most often how the pattern works. Not really, bro, but I know that that's the narrative that you like to look at and that you're still not questioning, despite the fact that you are talking about critiquing narratives. But the thing about patterns is that they are rules of thumb, heuristics, not perfect predictive tools. To the extent that they obscure nuance, they prevent us from revealing the complexity of coercion that is generally present. We prefer clear victim and aggressor when generally both parties have something to be accountable for, even if one party was significantly more violent than the other. Again, our fear that nuance will be manipulated to victim blame prevents us from really digging into the truth in all of its messy contradictions. No, the truth is not going to be contradictory, bro. The actual truth of the matter will be the thing that is least contradictory, by definition. But, well, I do need to give her kudos for questioning the entire victim-blaming narrative, because not that many far-left liberals do that, and implying that it can be abused. I have to give her credit for that. But once again, she is talking about how this is how narratives usually work, but it's not always that way. But she's still framing it through the narrative lens of her side, whilst claiming that we should question the narratives and look at them objectively. She assumes that is how the pattern usually works, even though that is the pattern that her narrative says is how it usually works. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, bros. Anyway, this particular matrix of rules and norms is just one that is common in left social justice circles. The reality of social capital is much more complex. In different networks and circles, social capital flows in different ways. Even overlapping friend groups may have different eddies and rivers. It seems like power just doesn't flow in clearly discernible ways, bro. Have you considered that your opening thesis has been disproven through your own article numerous times already? Anyway, the core issue is that those who are least good at navigating social capital are often barred from support, credibility, and respect, even though the how of this can be different in each subcommunity or group. So she is saying that this is a bad thing and these people should be given free social capital. The person with the runaway compounded social capital is often the cis guy, but sometimes it's the person who can best exploit the discourse. Once again, painting this narrative questioning theme through her narrative. This is the one who can swiftly and gracefully use radical catchphrases to justify manipulative conceit. For example, autonomy. Another type of social capital bourgeoisie can be the person with the most depression points for whom any critique would be seen as a minimalization of their struggle or a violence against their experience as truth. Truth in capital. I would criticize here, but she is actually going to go and pretty much say what I was going to say anyway. This latter phenomena is, of course, because so often intersectionally marginalized people are silenced and our truths are ignored. I like the shift from third to first person there. However, this can never give us carte blanche for fascism. We are the owners of experience as our truth, but we can also be wrong about how we interpret or draw conclusions from that information. No one person's thoughts should constitute absolute truth for other people, even if they have more of a certain kind of credibility from lived experience as that identity. This is what every anti-sjw and skeptic has been saying this entire time, bros. Just because you experience something one way does not mean that that's true for everyone. At the same time, I find it's a bit disingenuous that she is framing it initially as experience as truth, as our own personal truth. She is acknowledging that this frame of reference is bad at the end, but she still owns it until and kind of reluctantly gives it up. But honestly, it is good to see someone on the far left talking about how people can use their antisocial capital to abuse power. It is good to see that. We've all seen it happen. This can also happen in different ways when social capital is the main difference rather than dynamics of identity-based oppression. Like I said with my graph analogy, she's just adding an extra axis of complexity to this. Instead of just looking at it solely based on social capital, because she's already established oppression as social capital and privilege as social capital. They're just different kinds of social capital. But no, it has to be stuck in this intersectionality framework. For example, if two same-raced queer femmes get into an instance of violence, queer women are of roughly the same rates of domestic violence as straight couples, which is good that she's acknowledging that. As the story breaks into the community, there will be a tendency to trust the more likable party rather than look for credible evidence. This is because we interpret social capital as likability, or at least the veneer of cool that can render someone untouchable in a way that forces people into cognitive dissonance in their interpretation of events. If someone fears losing social status by speaking out against someone with significant social capital, the potential accuser will have a subconscious pull towards distorting either their own understanding of events to avoid risk, or at least altering how they present it publicly. Now, I don't see a problem with the latter part of that, because saving face in public and then going privately to talk with people and deal with the situation, to me, is fine. You don't have to publicly out someone. In fact, sometimes when you publicly confront someone, even if it's your friend in public, that can cause them embarrassment if it's true, and cause them to double down, or cause them to not like you. But if you go in private to address a problem, then things can often work out better for both of you. But the entire thing that people will alter the facts in their head to fit the narrative they want, that's a lot of mind reading to swallow right there. I think it is more of just a fear of consequences of making a public statement more than anything. This is because if something is dangerous, it's often hard to confront, so we have a built-in incentive to lie to ourselves that can only be confronted with intellectually and emotionally discerning diligence. No, it's not that the thing itself is dangerous, it's the consequences of what you do and how you do it that are dangerous. It's easy to confront something you don't like, it's just you have to be careful in how you confront it and what you do to confront it. And that is the dangerous thing, and the consequences of that. If we lie to protect or benefit ourselves, we've participated, if in a smaller role, to the original violence. No, I can't get behind that. You are essentially saying someone who is protecting themselves from further abuse is contributing to the abuse. That is just like saying when two bros are running away from a bear, and one falls down and gets eaten, the other one is directly responsible for that other person getting eaten by the bear, and then they should feel guilty about it. which is a thing that is commonly experienced and is called survivor's guilt. It is experienced by veterans and other people who have experienced traumatic experiences or seen someone undergo traumatic experiences that they could have possibly helped, but they looked up for their own self-interest rather than the other person's and spared themselves. And the thing is, survivor's guilt can lead to suicide if it's not dealt with. So you're telling people to have survivor's guilt if they don't actively speak up in a situation where they witness some sort of abuse, and you're blaming them for it. That's wrong. I mean, if I am using some bad metaphors here, bros, let me know, and I will correct myself. I will make another video correcting this issue, or any issues I am actually wrong about in this video. I will certainly make correction videos if I'm objectively wrong about something. Disrupting distortions of social capital is critical to real accountability and truth-seeking, especially surrounding the process of protecting survivors. I agree with this wholeheartedly. We should not let our perception of who is likable and who is not as likable cloud our perceptions of judgment in trying to discern who is right and wrong in a given situation. However, I do not agree that someone who doesn't speak up right then and there, or speaks up at all, is included in the guilt of the situation. The worst kind of asshole, amidst those that garner extensive social capital, whether on purpose or accidentally, there are the persons with sociopathic tendencies, and hey, there is a footnote here. I bet it is a disclaimer to backpedal on an absolutist statement that she's about to make. The word sociopath or the diagnosis of sociopathy are, of course, controversial terms with a wide range of usage and have been used to stifle dissent and neurodiversity. Basically, people with different mental disabilities. It's basically the mental equivalent of fat shaving someone. I guess the closest example I can give is dismissing someone who's autistic because they're autistic, etc. However, the phenomena described in this section above, as is understood by this term, stands as one of the most immediate internal threats to activist safety in radical communities, so I've chosen to use the word for clarity of communication, acknowledging that it's complex. Use of this term should not hide the fact that many of these are tendencies that we all possess in varying degrees. We should not pathologize as a means of ignoring our own capacity for non-consensual sadism. She's going to use this term despite the fact that it is actually quite inappropriate to use because it has a very specific actual meaning, but she's going to use it anyway. And I mean, I understand she's effectively using it for an emotional effect. She's acknowledging it, so I'll give her that credit, but she's still doing the pattern of, here's a blatantly absolutist statement, and no, it's a bit more nuanced than that. Amidst those that garner extensive social capital, whether on purpose or accidentally, there are the serial abusers, the professional politicians, and the targeter of vulnerable persons. These assholes will exploit charisma and raw selfish sadism to do whatever they can to protect themselves and their interests. But to make it worse, they'll convince masses of people that it's in their best interests to support them. They are practiced in the art of manipulation and social engineering, and they will seek out the empaths and those with a history of traumatic violence to victimize them with the knowledge that they will say nothing to no one. They will pull them close in a way that makes people look up to them for their caring appearance, and then they will systematically destroy their lives and weave them into a cycle of coercion and domination. There are, of course, persons incapable of empathy who still somehow develop a sense of roughly utilitarian ethics that makes them functionally decent. I've known some, but unfortunately, among sociopaths, they are the severe outlier. Now, this is a very, very, very scary sounding person indeed, bros. And this is just the beginning of her fear-mongering. Sociopathic persons may prey on activist communities who, in their naive generosity and fertile campus for social capital accumulation, breed and attract these weaponized wounds of humans. They will commonly utilize a casual misanthropy, subtle authoritarianism, and a twist of nihilism of the oppressed to justify their wake of destruction. Even their authoritarianism we come to accept because they get stuff done, because they're often great organizers that we come to depend on for a variety of projects. They make themselves unexpendable. All of the fallacies and subtle dynamics of social capital are tools in their kit. They thrive on cults of personalities centered around them. They're often incredibly intelligent. As selfish utilitarians, they will often flip and become snitches and hate collaborators if it seems in their benefit. They make it so that attacking them, or even questioning them on any front, will be the most dangerous thing that someone could possibly do, especially if the potential critics are so vulnerable that they depend entirely on their social networks for survival. Of course, people will say I'm exaggerating or playing into pathologizing psychiatric stereotypes, and while this is true to an extent, we can't back away from pointing out these persons in our community. See, she's just done a whole lot of fear-mongering and says, well, it's true that this isn't true for everyone, and some people who might seem this way might not actually be, but we still need to point these people out. Despite that she is not a licensed psychologist who can actually diagnose this sort of thing, we still have to use the WebMD to point this out. Many of the people who would minimize the brunt of my arguments are either the people who I describe, currently in the snares of some such figure and in denial, incredibly lucky, not paying attention, or just haven't been in radical communities for long enough. Or, bro, I'm just a person who thinks that you're trying to get people to be overly paranoid. I totally acknowledge that bros like this exist in every community, and it's very, very hard to actually identify these people because they are very good at hiding themselves. And you've even admitted this, that a lot of these characteristics can be true of anyone. But you are calling people to be constantly vigilant for people who fit the guidelines that you're about to actually define in the next paragraph. Swim in fringes and with outliers, nerds, social awkward, and weirdos of radical community for long enough, and people will start to come to you with the stories of the abusers that put the knife in, twisted, and then denied the existence of the knife publicly, and had too much social capital for anyone to take the accusation seriously. And I'm not going to say this doesn't happen, because it does. And it's a serious issue. But she is making far too absolutist statements regarding this for it to actually be useful in any community. Because usually, by the time someone's noticed someone who's really like this, it's already too late. It's almost impossible to catch someone like this short of someone being a genuine psychologist in your group. It's like I said, it's like going on WebMD and putting in all the different symptoms and them coming together to show, oh my gosh, I might have some sort of rare cancer that just happens to have most of the superfluous symptoms that I'm having right now. And the thing is, if you do the things that she says to do to the wrong person, you've just discredited your entire community if it gets found out. If you find these people in your circles, do whatever is necessary to protect yourself and those most at risk. Accountability and restorative justice processes are preferable whenever possible, but most of the time with the worst kind of asshole, they will flatly deny everything or fake their way through it, often at repeated harm to the victims. They cannot be trusted, and there is no ethically graceful way to deal with them. Maybe put them on an island with only steam as their currency? What the fuck is Steam? Oh, I guess it looks like some sort of cryptocurrency. I get this as a joke, but I don't get the joke. Except for no platforming, removing them, warning the communities they migrate to, and physically protecting the victims. Okay, so no platforming is basically not letting them speak. Basically what different universities have been doing with Milo Yiannopoulos. And that article that it links to talks about how it is actually not a form of censorship. Well, rather, it's not designed to be a form of censorship. It's a way of not allowing fascist ideas to be put into practice by not letting them be heard. Which I don't see how that's not censorship. If someone would like to explain the nuances of that to me, please do. I genuinely want to know. Some telltale signs to look out for are a string of quiet accusations from those that are noticeably less likely to defend themselves, especially publicly. Wide-reaching charisma, embrace of authoritarian ideas in intimate contexts, and skillful manipulation of social justice discourse and norms. Much of the time, though, you need no further than the center limelight of your community movements. Like, Anita Sarkeesian is very fluent in social justice terms and discourse and norms. She embraces authoritarian ideas, maybe not in intimate context, because she's pretty out there in saying that certain things should be shut down and not platformed. She has wide-reaching charisma because a lot of people like what she says. And, She is very much in the center limelight and getting lots and lots of not only social capital, but actual capital, fungible, real tangible money capital as well. Just ask yourself, who would I feel unable to question? Seeing as lots of universities will fail you if you question their social justice courses, who do I feel like has enough power to get away with something? I'm sure you can find multiple people in any group who fit both of those at the same time. Who do I feel afraid to have a needed conversation about? Does this person have a partner whose social capital almost entirely relies on their connection to the social capitalist? Social capitalist, bro. The problem I have with that one is that there are some people who are just naturally codependent and will latch on to anyone. It doesn't have to be the worst asshole ever. They just entirely devote their lives to a person and essentially believe that they can't live without that person. It can be anyone. It doesn't have to be the big, huge asshole person. And so what you might be seeing is just a codependent relationship. Chances are that the worst kind of asshole got to that position with full knowledge of what they were building and why. More mind reading. Once you've spotted them, warn people and defend yourself. Subvert their power as best you can, but also watch out, because if observed, you will be targeted. Such figures can be taken out, though, through a powerful coalition of consciousness, resistance, and brave survivors. Or, bros, you could just tell them to leave. Get a bunch of people, get the leaders of your group to publicly decry them and tell them to leave. You don't have to get everyone involved, just get the other leaders. And I know you don't like democracy, but take a group vote and have them leave. It's not that hard. Especially if this is a radical community that the other mainstream general public doesn't care about. There are a wide range of determinants, both nature, neurological architecture, and genetics, and nurture, trauma, and family of origin and abuse history as to why people become this way. After all that demonization, she is just now bringing in the sympathy card. And it's not even a really big sympathy card. These types of people accusations should not be leveled lightly. I have to give her credit for saying that, but that should have come up front and have been in my opinion, that should have been weaved throughout this entire thing and not just saved to the very end. Because that footnote comes right after this. I read it in the order that it should be read, but not everyone reads footnotes when they should. As they are often watered down to mean anything and disproportionate punishments are handed out as a result. But neither should we flinch when they are due. These persons are quite possibly the most serious internal threats to activist communities. No, bro, they are the single most threatening thing to any community. Flexible heuristics and the conversations we need. A firm yet nuanced resistance to domination and coercion, as is presented in anti-authoritarian ethics systems such as anarchism, provide a more subtle and flexible instrument of assessment than a rigid deployment of identity-based tallies. Anarchism asks us to acknowledge that power is dynamic. It is structural and also contextual. We should prioritize larger violences, of course, but not to the extent of minimizing the gray areas. Furthermore, anarchism asks us to remain intellectually vigilant and discerning about the ways we can best mobilize meaningful consent in the face of complex distortions resulting from social capital and its ilk. Social capital is actually bad. Ultimately, she is saying social capital is bad. Notice the term ilk. From this lens, we can more delicately and effectively edge into the conversations that we are collectively stumbling through. We can start to meaningfully ask how we perpetuate domination, coercion, and violence even in our attempts to undermine them with love, empathy, and discernment. I'm wondering if she is using violence to also mean words, because that's common in a lot of SJW narratives, but she hasn't explicitly stated it here, so she might be totally referring to real violence. And this was written before the entire Nazi punching thing became popular, so I would be very much interested in hearing what her opinion on that is, because she is very much against fascism and has identified violence as a fascist tactic. So, Emmy, if you're watching this, please let me know. I would genuinely like to have a dialogue about that. It is through this subtlety and slow trust building that we can amass the humility and dedication necessary to overcome violence in its diverse array of forms. That actually might answer my question right there. Through these conversations, we can strive to undermine and interrogate the hierarchical abuse of social capital in ourselves and our community, so that we can trade brittle and violent fallacies for flourishing and decentralized networks of intricate solidarity, individual earned trust, and meaningful accountability. Yes, okay. Violent fallacies. Yeah, I think she is including words and verbiage as violence. Unless any of you bros can give me an example of an actually violent fallacy, preferably with video clips. We are all implicated in this critique, myself certainly included, but we can support each other's growth and utilize accountability for those with an honest drive to participate. Most of us do earnestly want to eliminate violence and coercion, but struggle with the how of it. We can make social capital non-hierarchical. Cool kids, fuck off. That's it, bros. Cool kids, fuck off. What more can I say about it? Well, actually, I'm going to start off with the positives of this article before I go into the negatives. She does a great job in bringing up a whole lot of different issues as far as what stops dialogue. I mean, her issues with the entire oppression Olympics type thing, that minorities can be guilty of things too. I don't think she goes far enough in saying that because she's still under the narrative of systemic racism and stuff like that. But at the same time, she does admit that sometimes quote-unquote oppressed people can actually act in wrong ways. And so she wants to minimize that happening and have accountability where accountability is due. She also actually does, speaking of accountability, she does actually encourage accountability and objective accountability. She does say that narratives should be looked at objectively to find out who the actual perpetrator in a given problem is, and that everyone essentially should be treated equally under the law. Well, metaphorically speaking, because under an anarchist paradigm there is no law, but during conflict resolution things should be looked at objectively. And so she does bring up a lot of really good points as far as how people build trust and have an actual dialogue instead of just going on emotion, and how just because does not mean they're going to necessarily be in the right all the time. We on the skeptic and anti-sjw community say that a lot, and especially with a lot of the YouTube drama that's happened recently, I believe we can all agree on that. Now to the bad part of the article. I think that she takes a whole lot of words to come down to say that popularity is bad. There should be no one popular. Everyone in a group should have an equal voice and an equal say, and that no one should feel like their opinion is not valid. That is what she means by spreading out the social capital and making social capital non-hierarchical. I mean, she talks in praise of how in some situations, someone having a high amount of social capital in order to get a platform to spread a message is fine. But within the group, there should be none. In a group, they should all respect one another's opinion. She brings up the entire personal experience as truth thing, which is basically, in other words, anecdotal evidence. She says that it's both valid and not valid at the same time, so I'm not entirely sure what her position is. Her bringing up of context a lot leads me to believe that she believes that using one's personal experience as truth is appropriate in some cases and not others, and I would like to understand further what she would view as versus an inappropriate time before I make a judgment on that specific point. It's my opinion that she is inconsistent on that. The other thing is that intersectionality actually turned out to be more the framework than the actual topic of discussion in this. She starts talking about how intersectionality doesn't work and then throws that out the door with the social capital thing. But yeah, she sticks within a intersectional paradigm, which is my problem with feminism in general. I believe that it does basically create a caste system. It brings back those high school dynamics. But she's also saying that she acknowledges that it has flaws, which is good. This actually should go in the good point. She does acknowledge that intersectionality does have flaws. But her solution to intersectionality having flaws is adding an extra intersection to it, which, like I said, turns a coordinate plane into a cube, of a three-dimensional cube, which just convolutes everything even more. It takes two spectrums of infinity and adds a third spectrum of infinity to it. And like I said, I personally believe that we should try and work within the simplest system as possible. And as I said, you have to be flexible with things like that because some things are black and white. some things are more complicated than just being black and white. And some issues like which governmental system is best, there's a whole myriad of things that go into what government works best in what given society. And so there has to be some flexibility with that. And the other big, huge fault that I see in this article is while she does talk about questioning narratives, she doesn't question her own narrative. She points out that narratives can lead conflicts into states where you can't tell what's happening, and narratives can skew the views of everyone to favor one person over the other. And she points out that oftentimes the far left and radical narrative will demonize the white cis male, etc. At the same time, she goes ahead and demonizes the white cis male and purely uses that person or the popular Brocialist dude bro who she doesn't like as the example. She uses nothing but masculine examples for how social capital can be abused. No, I take that back. There are a few examples where she concedes that it can happen with women, but her major examples are male. Not even white cis male, but male. But she doesn't question. She even acknowledges that. She even acknowledges, bros, that the rule of thumb that radicals, the far left uses, are in fact just rules of thumbs, and that's. She says that, well, that's just how things normally go. Well, that shows that she understands that the narrative isn't always true, but she's still using her narrative as an axiom to view the situation. It is usually because of racism that bad things happen to people of color. It is usually because of male misogyny that bad things happen to women. It doesn't always, but that's the norm. So, while she does point out that narratives should be questioned, she doesn't actually question her base narrative, which it's right there in the article. I don't know how she didn't. I honestly don't see how she didn't see it herself. But yeah, in summary, intersectionality is imperfect, but it can be fixed by introducing social capital. And social capital brings in the fact that popularity is bad. So, bros, that is her article in a nutshell. I hope you bros enjoyed it, and I hope you'll let me know what you think. Please leave your comments in the comment section below, or I'm on Twitter. I'm Terry Bull. I'm also on Minds now. I'm Terry Bull. And as you bros can see, I've gotten some awesome new art from the Monarch, who is on Twitter at Die for the Monarch. She's a awesome broette from Germany who does some pretty awesome art. And she's currently taking commissions right now. So if you like what you've seen so far, head on over to her Twitter and hit her up. And also, if you like my content so far, please like, subscribe, and let me know what you think. Well, I'm going to wrap this up. So, peace, love, Tauros!